You know how you sometimes hear about a connection like how obesity might affect cancer, and you think, okay, I get the broad strokes, but you're really curious about the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, the actual sort of biological domino effect behind it all.
Exactly. That's what we're diving into today. We're unpacking a really fascinating piece of research. It gets right to the heart of how diet, specifically obesity, might actually help cancer cells spread in the body. You know, metastasis.
Right. It's not just about increasing the risk of getting cancer in the first place, potentially.
But actively helping it find new places to grow once it's there.
Precisely. And we're looking at a very insightful study for this. It's from researchers at the Spanish National Cancer Research Center, the CNIO.
Published in Nature Communications, I saw.
That's right. And what's really compelling, I think, is that it digs into the why. Why is there this link between obesity and more metastasis? We've known the link exists for a while, but the mechanisms...
The actual biology was a bit fuzzy.
Exactly. Understanding it at the cellular level.
And for this deep dive, we're focusing on their work with animal models, specifically for triple-negative breast cancer.
Yes. And that's a key area because, well, this type of cancer is known to be more aggressive, more likely to spread.
And it often goes to the lungs, right?
Frequently, yes.
Yeah.
So the researchers were looking at how a high-fat diet affected that specific pathway breast cancer spreading to the lungs in these mouse models.
Okay. So our mission today is basically to pull out the key findings, explain what they might mean for understanding, maybe even treating metastasis, but, you know, without drowning everyone in jargon.
Sounds like a plan. So let's start with the basic question they were asking.
Okay.
We know obesity is linked to a higher chance of breast cancer spreading. But the big unknown was the driver. What's happening biologically?
What's the engine behind it? Right. The connection's known, but the chain of events wasn't clear.
Mm-hmm. So to figure this out, the CNIO team used these mice models for triple-negative breast cancer.
Okay.
And then, crucially, they split them. Some got a standard diet.
And
the others got a high-fat diet designed to mimic the conditions of obesity.
Okay. So creating a controlled setup to see how cancer progressed differently. Obese versus non-obese, essentially.
Exactly. And one of the first things they noticed, which was pretty significant,
Yeah.
was that the high-fat diet seemed to, well, facilitate metastasis. It looked like it was promoting the development of something called a pre-metastatic niche.
A pre-metastatic niche in the lungs.
In the lungs of the mice on the high-fat diet, yes.
That sounds intentional almost, like the tumor is getting things ready.
That's a great way to think about it. It's like the original tumor sends out signals ahead of time.
To where it might spread.
To distant organs,
Yeah.
like the lungs here, preparing them, making them more receptive to incoming cancer cells.
Like softening the ground, maybe, making it more fertile for these new cancer colonies?
Exactly. And the study found this high-fat diet was helping to set up that welcoming environment in the lungs.
Okay, wow. So the lungs in the obese mice were being prepped, getting the message, get ready, cells incoming.
Something like that, yeah.
So what were the changes? What specifically made those lungs more receptive?
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, into the details. They pinpointed a couple of key things happening. First, they saw more activity from platelets.
Platelets, those are the blood clotting cells.
That's them. The small cells involved in clotting. They saw increased platelet activation and just generally more blood clotting happening in the mice on the high-fat diet.
Which kind of makes sense, right? We know obesity can affect coagulation.
It can, yes.
Yeah.
So that wasn't totally out of the blue. But then one of the researchers, Marta Hergeta, she noticed something quite specific. The actual cancer cells circulating in the blood of the high-fat diet mice.
What about them?
They were covered in more platelets, significantly more coated than the cells in the mice on the standard diet.
Coated in platelets, huh?
Mm-hmm. And this led another researcher, Hector Peinado, to propose what he called the platelet armor hypothesis.
Platelet armor, that's a very visual term. So the idea is the cancer cells are wearing protection.
That's the core idea, yes. This layer, this coating of platelets, might actually shield the cancer cells while they're traveling in the bloodstream.
Shield them from what?
From the body's own immune system, acting like a barrier. Peinado described it as, and I'm quoting here, an armor around the tumor cells, preventing the immune system from recognizing and eliminating them.
Wow. So they become harder to spot, harder to kill off.
Potentially, yes. These platelet-cloaked cells might just have a better survival rate during that dangerous journey through the bloodstream.
Giving them a better shot at landing somewhere new and setting up shop.
That's the hypothesis.
That makes a lot of sense. Like they've got their own little invisibility cloak or bodyguard detail.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
But you mentioned there was another factor, beyond the platelets.
I did. What else was changing?
The other major player they identified was a protein called fibronectin.
Fibronectin, okay.
They found the high-fat diet led to more fibronectin being present in the lung tissue itself.
And what does fibronectin normally do? What's its day job in the lungs?
It's basically a structural protein. Part of the extracellular matrix, a scaffolding between cells. It helps cells stick together, gives tissue its structure.
Okay, so it's like building material.
Kind of, yeah. But when you have more of it, in this context, it seems to make the lung tissue environment stickier, more receptive for metastatic cancer cells.
Ah, so it makes it easier for them to latch on and start growing.
Seems like it. Think of it like adding more Velcro to a surface makes it easier for things to stick.
Gotcha. So the obese mice had this potential double hit, incoming cancer cells shielded by platelets, and arriving in lungs that were stickier, more welcoming because of extra fibronectin.
That's the picture emerging from the mouse models, yes.
Yeah.
And Painato also noted that fibronectin seemed to help the tumor cells interact better with other things, too.
Like what?
Like the cells lining the blood vessels in the lungs, the endothelium, and also with the platelets themselves.
So it's a facilitator.
It seems that way. His quote was, "We have seen that the interaction of the tumor cell with both the lung endothelium and the platelet is regulated by fibronectin. So it's helping make those connections happen."
Which are crucial for the cancer cell to actually get out of the blood vessel and into the lung tissue.
Exactly, to establish that foothold.
Okay, this is all fascinating in the animal models, but, the crucial question, what about people? Did they look at human data?
They did, yes. The CNIO has a breast cancer clinical research unit, and they collaborated on this.
Okay.
They analyzed blood samples from actual patients with triple-negative breast cancer, both before surgery and after chemo.
Did they see the same direct link? Obesity leading to more metastasis?
Well, here it gets a bit more nuanced. In this initial analysis, they didn't find a direct, statistically significant link suggesting obesity itself was an additional risk factor for actually generating metastases at that particular point in time they measured.
Ah, okay. So not quite the same smoking gun as in the mice, initially at least.
Not in terms of obesity directly correlating with more detectable metastases in that specific data set and time point. However...
There's a however.
Good. There is. They found something else significant. Patients who showed signs of increased blood coagulation.
Like the mice on the high-fat diet.
Exactly. Indicated by a shorter prothrombin time. That's a lab measure for how fast blood clots.
Okay.
Those patients had a higher risk of the cancer coming back, relapsing, within 5 years.
So increased clotting tendency was linked to worse outcomes later on?
Correct. A higher risk of relapse at 5 years.
How does that connect back to the mice then? It feels related but not identical.
It suggests that this tendency towards clotting, this hypercoagulable state, might be an important risk factor in humans too, even if the direct link to obesity wasn't clear in this specific data set.
So it points towards similar underlying biology possibly being involved. Platelets, coagulation.
It definitely points in that direction.
Yeah.
It strengthens the idea that these coagulation pathways are relevant.
Yeah.
As Painato put it, findings like this could help identify additional risk factors in breast cancer patients undergoing treatment.
Thus contributing to a better clinical management of the disease. I see that quote here.
Exactly. It's another piece of the puzzle, suggesting these mechanisms are worth paying attention to in patients.
Okay. So maybe not a direct obesity link in this first human look, but the coagulation finding echoes the animal work. That feels important. Now, you mentioned earlier there was some hope offered by the study, too, regarding interventions.
Yes, and this was quite promising.
What happened when they changed the diet back in the mice?
They took the mice that had been on the high-fat diet, the obese mice, and they switched them back to a standard diet.
Okay.
The mice lost weight, as you'd expect. But, crucially, their platelet activity and their blood coagulation levels started to return towards normal.
And did that affect the metastasis?
It did. They observed a reduction in the development of lung metastases in those mice after the diet change and weight loss.
Wow, okay. That is significant. It suggests these diet-driven changes might not be permanent, at least in mice.
It certainly suggests a degree of reversibility in the animal model, yes. which has some potentially exciting implications.
For treatment, you mean?
Absolutely. It opens the door to thinking about future strategies. Konado talked about this.
What was his take?
He basically envisioned a future where, perhaps, dietary changes.
Like losing weight if obese?
Potentially, yes. Dietary interventions may be combined with treatments specifically aimed at controlling platelet activity.
The armor.
Right. That this combination could actually boost the effectiveness of some of the standard anti-tumor treatments we already use.
So not replacing chemo or immunotherapy, but making them work better?
Precisely. He was very clear on that. His quote was, "I think these results present a future where dietary intervention or dietary changes, along with control of platelet activity, may increase the efficiency of certain anti-tumor treatments."
And he added,
"They are not going to be treatments by themselves, but they can complement them."
That's a really important distinction. Complementary, not replacement. A more holistic strategy, maybe.
That seems to be the idea.
Yeah.
Thinking about the patient's overall metabolic state and how it might influence treatment success.
Makes sense. And just before we wrap up, we should probably acknowledge who funded this work.
Good point. The main funding came from a British NGO, Worldwide Cancer Research.
Okay.
But there were also significant contributions from Spanish sources, both state and private, like the Ministry of Science, the La Caixa Foundation, and the Spanish Association Against Cancer. Important support.
Definitely. Okay, so just to boil this down for everyone listening to this deep dive.
Yeah, the key takeaways.
This CNIO study gives us some really compelling clues, mostly from animal models so far, about how a high-fat diet leading to obesity might help cancer spread.
Right. It seems to work partly by boosting platelet activity, potentially creating that platelet armor to shield traveling cancer cells.
And also by increasing fibronectin in places like the lungs, making them, well, stickier and more receptive environments for metastasis.
Exactly. And while the human data they looked at initially didn't show a direct obesity metastasis link at that moment,
it did link increased blood clotting activity to a higher risk of the cancer coming back later.
Which resonates with the platelet findings in the mice. And importantly, reversing the high-fat diet in the mice reduced metastasis.
Which hints at this potential future strategy. Maybe combining dietary changes with ways to manage platelet activity could help make current cancer treatments more effective.
It's an exciting possibility, though obviously needs much more research, especially in humans, but it points towards a future where we might complement existing therapies.
It really does underscore how lifestyle factors like diet can weave into these incredibly complex biological processes in ways we're really just beginning to fully map out. So maybe a final thought for our listeners. Perhaps consider how these kinds of studies prompt us to look deeper into that whole interplay between how we live, our metabolism, and our risk or progression of diseases like cancer. There's a huge amount of research going on there.
Definitely a lot more to learn, and potentially a lot we can do.